The screams echoed through Corridor 7 of the Galactic Academy, causing even the security drones to pause their patrol routes. Inside Xenobiology Lab 3, chaos had erupted in what was supposed to be a routine predator demonstration. Professor Zithkar's four eyes widened in terror as the Vexnari Shadowhound broke free from its containment field. The creature, standing 8 feet tall with razor-sharp claws and teeth like obsidian daggers, had been brought to demonstrate apex predator behavior to the mixed species class. Now it stalked between the lab benches, its black hide rippling, with barely contained violence. Everyone remained calm. Professor Zithkar's voice cracked as he backed toward the emergency alert button. His scaled hands trembled. Do not make any sudden movements. The 23 students from across the galaxy pressed themselves against the walls. The Altarian twins huddled together, their crystalline bodies dimming with fear. The young Corvin, Noble, clutched his breathing apparatus, his gills fluttering rapidly. Even the usually confident Zenthari warrior scholar had her hand frozen halfway to her weapon. But in the back corner, one student remained perfectly still. Marcus Chen sat at his workstation, seemingly unbothered by the pandemonium around him. The human, one of only 12 of his species enrolled in the academy, continued taking notes on his datapad. His brown eyes tracked the creature's movements with the same clinical interest he'd shown during the earlier lecture on symbiotic relationships. The Shadowhound's head snapped toward a whimpering Plexvi student. The creature's muscles bunched as it prepared to spring. In the wild, a Vexnari Shadowhound could tear through a hover tank's armor plating. Against soft academic flesh, it would be a massacre. No sudden movements. Professor Zithkar whispered again, his voice barely audible over the sound of the creature's heavy breathing. That's when Marcus Chen stood up. The movement was fluid, unhurried, like a person getting up to stretch during a long meeting. Every eye in the room turned to him, including the Shadowhound's glowing red orbs. Sit, Marcus said quietly. The predator that had terrorized an entire classroom of galactic citizens immediately dropped to its haunches. Its tail, which had been lashing dangerously moments before, now lay still against the floor. The silence that followed was more unnerving than the screams had been. How? Professor Zithkar's voice was barely a whisper. Marcus finally looked up, from his datapad, as if just noticing the commotion. Oh, the Shadowhound? They're pack hunters. Social hierarchy is everything to them. You just have to establish dominance. He glanced at the creature, which was now sitting as obediently as a house pet. Basic animal psychology. Basic? The Zenthari warrior scholar Tisha found her voice first. That creature killed 3 trained handlers on its homeworld before capture. Marcus shrugged. Probably because they approached it as prey would. Fear scent triggers their hunting instinct. He walked over to the Shadowhound, which remained perfectly still. But if you approach with confidence, show no fear, maintain eye contact, use firm vocal commands, they recognize you as an alpha. He reached out and scratched behind what might charitably be called the creature's ears. The Shadowhound leaned into the touch, making a sound somewhere between a purr and a growl. The room erupted in shocked murmurs from 24 species, each translating their amazement into their native tongues. Impossible, whispered the Corvin noble. My species has studied predator behavior for millennia. The Vexnari Shadowhound is classified as untrainable. Maybe you've been studying them wrong, Marcus replied, still petting the creature that, moments ago, had been ready to slaughter everyone in the room. Professor Zithkar slowly approached, his 4 eyes never leaving the now docile predator. Mr. Chen, how did you know this would work? I didn't, Marcus said honestly. But where I come from, we have a saying. The best defense is a good offense. Sometimes you have to take risks. And if you had been wrong, Tisha demanded. Marcus met her gaze directly. Then I would have died protecting my classmates. Better than cowering in a corner waiting for someone else to be killed first. The statement sent a chill through the room, not because of its morbidity, but because of the matter-of-fact way he said it. As if sacrificing himself for strangers was the most natural thing in the world. "Where exactly do you come from, human?" asked one of the Altarian twins, her voice creating crystalline harmonics in the air. "Earth," Marcus replied. "Sol system. It's pretty far out on the rim." "I've never heard of it," Professor Zithkar admitted. "Most people haven't. We're fairly new to the galactic community." Marcus gave the Shadowhound one final pat before stepping back. "Only discovered faster than light. Travel about 30 years ago. A primitive world, then," the Corvin noble said dismissively. Something flickered in Marcus's eyes, so briefly that most of the class missed it, but Tisha caught it, and the look made her hand instinctively move toward her weapon again. "Something like that," Marcus said mildly. Professor Zithkar finally reached the emergency controls and reactivated the containment field around the Shadowhound. The creature remained sitting even as the energy barrier reformed around it, occasionally looking toward Marcus as if awaiting further commands. "Class dismissed," the professor announced, his scales still pale with shock. "We will discuss this incident in our next session." As the students filed out, chattering excitedly in a dozen languages, Tisha lingered behind. She approached Marcus, who was packing his datapad with the same unhurried efficiency he'd shown throughout the crisis. "That was either very brave or very stupid," she said. "Probably both," Marcus admitted. "But it worked. This time. What if the next predator isn't so easily impressed?" Marcus shouldered his bag and looked at her directly. Tisha was used to intimidating other species with her height, her natural armor, and her warrior's bearing. But looking into the humans' dark eyes, she felt something she hadn't experienced since childhood: uncertainty. "Then I guess we'll find out what else I can do," he said. As Marcus left the laboratory, none of his classmates noticed that the Shadowhound's eyes followed him until he disappeared from sight. None of them noticed that the creature had stopped trying to escape its containment field entirely, and none of them thought to wonder what kind of world would produce someone who could face down a galactic apex predator without breaking a sweat. But they were about to find out. Chapter 2. Questions in the Dark. The Academy's archives hummed with the quiet efficiency of 10,000 years of accumulated knowledge. Holographic displays floated between towering data cores, each one containing the collected wisdom of entire civilizations. It was here, 3 days after the incident with the Shadowhound, that Tisha found herself searching for answers that seemed increasingly elusive. Computer, display all available information on Sol system, third planet, designation, Earth. The car. Response was immediate but disappointing. A small hologram materialized showing a blue-green world orbiting a yellow star. Basic astronomical data scrolled alongside it. Mass, atmospheric composition, orbital period. Nothing unusual. Nothing that would explain Marcus Chen. Expand search to include species designation, human. More data appeared, but it was sparse. Humans were classified as a Class 7 developing species, one step above primitive tool users. Their faster-than-light technology was noted as recently acquired, probably borrowed or reverse-engineered from other species. Their military was listed as minimal threat level, with conventional weapons and basic energy shields. Tisha frowned. The classification made no sense. She had seen Marcus face down a Vexnari Shadowhound without weapons, without shields, without even raising his voice. That was not the behavior of a species ranked barely above stone tool users. "Hey, Tisha." She spun around to find Marcus himself approaching through the archive stacks. He moved silently despite his size, another oddity she'd noticed. Most species made some noise when they walked. Humans, apparently, had a disturbing talent for stealth. "Marcus, I was just researching some xenobiology topics." "About Earth?" He'd noticed the holographic display before she could dismiss it. Instead of seeming offended, he looked amused. "Find anything interesting?" "Your world is listed as Class 7 developing, but that doesn't match what I've observed." Marcus moved closer to study the display. "Computer, show current galactic threat classifications." A new hologram appeared, showing the standard scale used by the Galactic Council to assess species capabilities. Class 1 species were galaxy-spanning civilizations like the ancient ethereals. Class 10 species were pre-tool-using primitives. Humans sat at Class 7, in the company of species that had barely achieved interplanetary flight. Seems about right, Marcus said quietly. No, it doesn't. Tisha's warrior instincts were screaming that something was wrong. A Class 7 species shouldn't be able to dominate apex predators. They shouldn't have individuals who can remain calm in life-threatening situations. They shouldn't what? Marcus's voice had grown very quiet. Tisha realized she was voicing suspicions that could be interpreted as accusations. In Zenthari culture, questioning another being's honesty was close to a declaration of combat. But she was too deep to back down now. Shouldn't be able to do what you did 3 days ago. For a long moment, Marcus studied her face. Then he gestured to the data display. Tell me, Tisha, what do you see when you look at these classifications? A ranking system based on technological advancement, military capability, and territorial expansion. Exactly. And by those standards, humans are Class 7. We've got 1-star system, basic FTL drives, and no real military to speak of. He paused. But what if the classification system is missing something important, such as what it takes to survive on a world that actively tries to kill everything living on it? Tisha felt a chill run down her spine. What do you mean? Marcus dismissed the holographic displays with a gesture. Want to grab some food? This conversation might take a while. 20 minutes later, they sat in the Academy's multi-species cafeteria. Tisha had ordered her usual protein synthesis cubes, while Marcus had somehow managed to convince the food dispensers to produce what he claimed was a sandwich, an apparently primitive food preparation method that involved placing various organic materials between slices of processed grain. So, Tisha said, trying to ignore the way other students kept glancing toward their table. Tell me about Earth. Marcus took a bite of his sandwich and seemed to consider where to begin. What's the most dangerous predator on your homeworld? The saber claws of the northern mountains. They're about 12 feet long, heavily armored, and hunt in packs. They kill maybe a dozen Zenthari per year. 12 per year. Out of how many total Zenthari? About 8 billion. So your apex predator kills roughly 0.00015% of your population, annually. Tisha nodded, not sure where this was leading. On Earth, Marcus continued, we have something called sharks. Just one type of predator among thousands. They kill about 10 humans per year. But here's the thing, we kill about 100 million of them per year. You hunt them for food? Some. Most of them die because they get in the way of our fishing operations. We're not even trying to kill them specifically, they're just collateral damage. Tisha set down her protein cube. How many of these shark creatures are there? Was maybe 400 million. Now closer to 100 million thanks to us. The numbers didn't make sense. If they're predators, how are there so many? And how do you kill so many without advanced weapons? That's just sharks. Want to hear about bears, tigers, crocodiles, venomous snakes and spiders? Microscopic parasites that can eat your brain? Plants that can kill you by touch? Tisha's food had gone cold, but she no longer had an appetite anyway. Every ecosystem on Earth is basically an arms race, Marcus continued, conversationally. Everything is trying to eat everything else, and everything is trying to avoid being eaten. The plants develop toxins, so the animals develop resistance. The prey gets faster, so the predators get faster. The predators get bigger, so the prey gets better at hiding or fighting back. And humans? Where do you fit in this arms race? Marcus smiled, and for the first time Tisha noticed that his teeth were rather pointed. Not as obvious as a true predator species, but definitely there. We're what you might call the end result. End result of what? Of a world that spent 4 billion years trying to kill us. The cafeteria suddenly felt very quiet around them, despite being full of chattering students from across the galaxy. Tisha, let me ask you something. When that shadowhound broke containment, what was your first instinct? To reach for my weapon. And when you realized you couldn't get to it in time? To find cover and wait for security. Right. Natural responses for most species. Fight if you can win, hide if you can't. Marcus leaned forward slightly. Want to know what my first instinct was? Tisha found herself nodding despite a growing sense that she didn't want to know the answer. I started calculating how to kill it with my bare hands. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Not how to escape. Not how to hide. Not even how to defend myself. My brain immediately started working out the most efficient way to kill a creature that outweighed me by 300 pounds and had natural weapons that could cut through armor. Tisha struggled for words. That's not normal. No, Marcus agreed. It's not. But it's human. Across the cafeteria, other students continued their conversations, oblivious to the revelation taking place at a corner table. A group of Corvan diplomats discussed trade negotiations. Some Altarian engineers debated quantum mechanics, the mundane interactions of civilized species going about their civilized lives. Marcus, Tisha said quietly, what aren't you telling me about Earth? He finished his sandwich and wiped his hands on a napkin, another primitive custom that somehow seemed ominous in the current context. I'm not telling you that every major species on our planet went extinct except us. I'm not telling you that we survived ice ages, supervolcanic eruptions, asteroid impacts, and plagues that wiped out 90% of all life. I'm not telling you that we learned to make tools from the bones of things that used to eat us. He stood up, gathering his tray. And I'm definitely not telling you that the Galactic Council's classification system doesn't have a category for a species that won an evolutionary arms race against an entire planet. As Marcus walked away, Tisha sat alone with her growing dread and one inescapable conclusion. The galaxy had no idea what it had just invited to join the cosmic community. But she was beginning to understand why the Shadowhound had submitted so quickly. It had recognized another apex predator. Chapter 3. The test. The message arrived at 0347 local time, delivered by a security drone that bypassed all normal academy protocols. Tisha woke to find the angular device hovering beside her bed, its red lights pulsing urgently. Priority communication for Zenthari citizen Tisha Veltaran. Authentication code Omega-77 Black. The authentication code sent ice through her veins. Omega-7 meant direct orders from the Zenthari High Command. The Black designation meant the orders were classified beyond her current security clearance. She activated the message with a touch, and a hologram of Fleet Commander Sektar materialized in her dormitory room. The old warrior looked grim, his battle-scarred carapace reflecting the harsh light of a military communication center. Tisha, you are to report immediately to Deep Level 7, Section C. You will find Professor Vexhan waiting for you. Follow his instructions exactly, and speak of this to no one. The hologram flickered and died, leaving Tisha alone with more questions than answers. Deep Level 7 was restricted territory, the part of the academy where the most dangerous research took place. Tisha had never been below Level 3, and she wasn't sure she wanted to know what required such extreme security measures. But orders were orders. An hour later, she stood before a blast door marked with symbols in 17 different languages, all variations of authorized personnel, only and lethal force authorized. Her identity scanner beeped green, and the door dilated open with a hiss of equalizing atmosphere. The corridors beyond were different from the academy's upper levels. Here, everything was military-grade construction, reinforced walls, redundant, life support systems and security sensors that tracked her every movement. The lighting was harsher, the air recyclers louder. This wasn't a place of learning, it was a fortress. Professor Vexhan waited for her in Observation Room C7, a chamber overlooking what appeared to be an elaborate training facility. The elderly ethereal's normally pristine robes showed signs of stress. Wrinkled fabric and dim bioluminescent patches that usually glowed with scholarly contentment. Ah, Tisha, good. We have much to discuss and little time. Professor, I don't understand. Why am I here? Because you have been in closer contact with the human than any other student. Vexhan gestured toward the observation window. And because we need someone who can evaluate what we're about to see. Tisha moved to the window and looked down into the training facility. It was larger than she'd expected, easily the size of a starship hangar. Holographic projectors created a realistic forest environment, complete with simulated weather patterns and terrain obstacles. What kind of training is this for? Combat evaluation, Vexhan said simply. Tisha, 3 days ago, you witnessed something that has caused considerable concern among the faculty. A Class 7 species individual dominated a Vexnari Shadowhound without technology, without weapons, without any apparent effort. Marcus explained that. Basic animal psychology. Did he? Professor Vexhan called up a holographic display showing the incident from multiple angles. Security footage Tisha hadn't known existed. Watch his biometric readings during the encounter. New data overlaid the image. Heart rate, respiration, stress hormones, brain activity patterns. Tisha studied the numbers and felt her own stress levels climbing. His heart rate barely elevated. His stress hormones actually decreased during the confrontation. And look at this. Vexhan highlighted specific brainwave patterns, neural activity consistent with a hunting predator, not prey animal. What are you saying? I'm saying that when faced with mortal danger, Marcus Chen's physiology didn't respond with fear. It responded with predatory excitement. The professor's bioluminescent patches dimmed further. Tisha, we've been studying combat psychology for millennia. We know what different species look like when they're afraid, when they're angry, when they're determined to fight, but this, he trailed off, pointing to the biometric display. This is what a creature looks like when it's enjoying itself. A new voice cut through the observation chamber. Beginning evaluation protocol 77 Alpha. On the training floor below, Marcus Chen emerged from what appeared to be solid forest. Tisha realized she'd been looking directly at him for several minutes without seeing him, another disturbing indication of human capabilities. We asked Mr. Chen to participate in a voluntary evaluation, Professor Vexhan explained. Standard academy survival training, the kind of exercise we use to test military candidates from across the galaxy. And he agreed? Enthusiastically. In the simulated forest below, Marcus moved through the holographic environment with fluid grace. He paused occasionally to examine plants or animal tracks, but his movements were purposeful and efficient, like someone who had done this many times before. What's the objective of the test? Survival for 72 hours in a hostile environment, populated with various predator species. Food and water must be acquired from local sources. Candidates are evaluated on their ability to avoid or neutralize threats while maintaining basic health parameters. Seems straightforward. It is. For most species, it's challenging but manageable. The predators are programmed to be aggressive, but not overwhelming. The environment provides adequate resources for those clever enough to find them. Professor Vexhan manipulated the display controls, and Tisha could see data streams from dozens of monitoring systems throughout the training facility. Environmental sensors, predator tracking, biometric monitors, everything needed to ensure candidate safety while gathering comprehensive data. How many candidates typically complete the full 72 hours? Tisha asked. About 60%. Most failures are due to inability to secure adequate food or water, not predator encounters. The creatures are programmed to be cautious. They'll attack if cornered or if they perceive easy prey, but they generally avoid unnecessary risks. On the display, Marcus had found what appeared to be a water source. But instead of drinking immediately, he spent several minutes examining the area around it. He collected samples of soil and vegetation, tested them with crude chemical analyses, and even tasted small amounts before committing to drinking. Smart, Tisha observed. Testing for contamination. Yes, but look how he's doing it. No testing. Equipment. No chemical analyzers. He's using primitive field techniques that shouldn't be in any academy database. Maybe Earth has similar environments. Maybe. Professor Vexhan didn't sound convinced. Tisha, watch what happens next. As if on cue, the first predator appeared. It was a Corvin marsh stalker, 8 feet of muscle and razor-sharp claws, adapted for hunting in dense vegetation. The creature had been modified for training purposes. Its claws were blunted enough to avoid causing fatal injuries, and its aggression levels were scaled back to reduce genuine lethality. But it was still a formidable opponent, capable of killing or seriously injuring most Academy cadets. The marsh stalker approached Marcus's position downwind, moving with the patient stealth of an ambush predator. Its training programming would have it test the human's awareness and defensive capabilities before deciding whether to attack or withdraw. Marcus never looked up from his water source. The stalker crept closer. 10 meters. 5 meters. Close enough that Tisha could see its muscles bunching for a spring. Marcus splashed water on his face and began to turn around. The stalker leaped. What happened next lasted perhaps 3 seconds, but Tisha would replay those moments in her mind for years afterward. Marcus didn't dodge the attack. He didn't try to run or call for help. Instead, he stepped into the creature's trajectory and did something that the Academy's best xenobiologist would later struggle to explain. He grabbed the marsh stalker's leading forelimbs as it struck, used its own momentum to spin himself underneath its body, and drove his knee upward into what any predator species would recognize as a vulnerable area. The stalker hit the ground hard, gasping and immobilized by pain. Marcus stood over it for a moment, studying its condition with clinical detachment. Then he did something that made Professor Vexihan's bioluminescent patches go completely dark. He began fashioning a spear from a nearby branch. "Stop the test," Tisha said urgently. "I can't. He hasn't called for extraction. He's going to kill it. The training protocols specifically prohibit lethal force. He knows that. Does he care?" On the training floor, Marcus had finished his improvised weapon. The spear was crude but functional, sharpened point, balanced weight distribution, designed for maximum penetration. He approached the still struggling stalker and raised the weapon. Tisha found herself holding her breath. Marcus drove the spear into the ground next to the creature's head, missing by perhaps an inch. The stalker froze completely, finally recognizing that it was no longer the predator in this encounter. "Mercy," Professor Vexhan whispered. "He showed mercy. Or he's just following the rules." "No." The professor called up Marcus's biometric data again. "Look at his neural patterns during the encounter. This is the brain activity of someone making a conscious choice to spare life he could easily take." Tisha studied the readings and felt something cold settle in her stomach. He wasn't afraid of the stalker. He was afraid of himself. Beginning to understand? On the screen, Marcus was fashioning a crude cage around the injured stalker, not to contain it but to protect it while it recovered. He worked with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times before, creating shelter and even providing water for the creature that had just tried to kill him. "Professor," Tisha said, quietly, "what kind of world creates people like this?" "The kind of world," came a new voice from behind them, "that you don't want to make an enemy of." They turned to find Fleet Commander Sektar entering the observation chamber, flanked by 2 Zenthari intelligence officers. "Commander," Tisha began, "I didn't know you were at ease, soldier. You're not in trouble." Sektar moved to the observation window and watched Marcus completing his improvised shelter. "At least not yet." "Sir?" "Tisha, 3 days ago you witnessed something unprecedented. A member of a supposedly primitive species demonstrated capabilities that don't match any known classification. Today, we've confirmed that this wasn't an isolated incident." The commander gestured toward the training floor, where Marcus had finished his shelter and was now exploring the surrounding area with systematic thoroughness. "Mr. Chen is currently demonstrating survival skills that exceed those of our best Special Forces operatives. He's identified 17 different edible plants, located 3 separate water sources, and constructed shelter that would be difficult to detect even with military sensors. And that's just in the first 4 hours," Professor Vexhan added. "Commander, what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that the Galactic Council's classification of humanity needs immediate revision. I'm suggesting that we may have just encountered our first example of a true Death World species." Tisha felt the blood drain. from her face. Death world, a theoretical classification for planets so hostile that they produce species adapted for constant survival. We've never confirmed one actually existed. On the training floor below, Marcus had begun setting up what appeared to be a complex series of early warning systems around his campsite. Tripwires, noisemakers, even some kind of primitive but effective motion detection system. Until now, Commander Sektar continued. The question is, what do we do about it? What do you mean? I mean, Tisha, that we've just discovered a species that can casually dominate our apex predators, that treats lethal combat as routine problem solving, and that shows psychological profiles consistent with apex predator status. The commander turned from the window to face her directly, and we've invited 12 of them to study at our most advanced academic institution, where they have access to our best technology, our military science, and detailed information about every major species in the galaxy. The implications hit Tisha like a physical blow. You think they're spies. I think they're whatever Earth wants them to be. The question is, what does Earth want? Below them, Marcus Chen continued his survival exercise, unaware that his every action was being analyzed by some of the galaxy's best military minds. Unaware that his presence at the Academy had just triggered the first major intelligence crisis in Galactic Council history. But as Tisha watched him work, she remembered his words from their conversation in the cafeteria. My brain immediately started working out the most efficient way to kill a creature that outweighed me by 300 pounds. And she realized that the galaxy's newest member species might be far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Chapter 4. Revelation. The emergency session of the Academy Board convened at 2300 hours, long after most students had retired to their dormitories. The circular chamber, normally used for academic ceremonies, now hosted representatives from 7 major galactic powers. Holographic projectors displayed real-time feeds from the ongoing survival evaluation, where Marcus Chen had just entered, his second day of testing. Tisha stood at attention before the assembled dignitaries, still wearing her academy uniform but now functioning as an intelligence asset rather than a student. The weight of what she'd witnessed pressed down on her, like a gravitational field. Citizen Tisha, Fleet Commander Sektar's voice carried formal authority. Please describe your observations of human behavior patterns to the board. The assembled representatives leaned forward with varying degrees of alien interest. Chancellor? Morden of the Corvin Trade Alliance drummed his fingers in nervous rhythms. The Ethereal Council's speaker maintained perfect stillness, but her bioluminescent patches flickered rapidly, a sign of deep concern. Even the normally stoic Altarian delegate showed stress fractures in her crystalline features. Honored representatives, Tisha began. The human-designated Marcus Chen displays behavioral patterns inconsistent with Class 7 species classification. Elaborate, requested Ambassador Telani from the Vexnari Confederacy. Her species had particular interest in this evaluation. The Shadowhound incident had occurred in their territory. The human shows no fear response to lethal threats. Instead, he demonstrates what our combat psychologists classify as predator excitement, elevated focus and efficiency when faced with dangerous situations. One individual does not represent an entire species, Chancellor Morden interjected. Perhaps this Chen is an aberrant example. That's what we thought, Professor Vexhan said, activating a new holographic display. Until we examined the psychological profiles of all 12 humans currently enrolled at the Academy, the display showed comparative neural pattern analyses from standard Academy entrance evaluations. 12 human brain scans appeared alongside baseline readings from 20 other species. Every human applicant shows identical anomalies, heightened aggression responses, elevated pain tolerance, and neural architecture optimized for rapid threat assessment and neutralization. Ambassador Telani's translator struggled with her next comment, rendering it roughly as concerning statistical improbability. There's more, Fleet Commander Sektar said grimly. He gestured, and the display shifted to show Marcus's current activities on the training floor. During the night, the human had not simply maintained his shelter. He had systematically trapped or neutralized every predator species within a 2-kilometer radius. Not killed, the Academy's prohibition against lethal force still held, but rendered harmless through an array of improvised snares, pit traps, and what could only be described as psychological warfare. He's turned a survival exercise into a territorial conquest, observed the ethereal speaker. The predators now avoid his designated area entirely. And he accomplished this, while maintaining perfect stealth protocols, added Professor Vexhan. Our sensors can barely track his movements despite close-range monitoring equipment. Chancellor Morden stood abruptly, his breathing apparatus cycling rapidly. I request immediate clarification. Are you suggesting the humans have infiltrated the Academy as an advanced military force? We're suggesting, Fleet Commander Sektar replied carefully, that we need more information about their true capabilities and intentions. Then I propose we ask them directly. The new voice came from the chamber's entrance, where a small group of humans had just arrived. Leading them was Marcus Chen himself, still wearing his training gear but apparently having completed the 72-hour evaluation in 36 hours. The board members reacted with various species-appropriate expressions of shock and alarm. Several reached for weapons that weren't present in the academic setting. Others activated personal shields or called for security. Marcus raised his hands in a universal gesture of non-aggression. We're not here to cause trouble. We just think it's time for an honest conversation. How did you get past Academy security? Fleet Commander Sektar demanded. We asked nicely, replied another human, Dr. Sarah Kim, the Academy's newest xenobiology instructor. Turns out your security protocols have some interesting gaps if you know how to look for them. Tisha felt her warrior instincts screaming danger signals. The humans had somehow penetrated one of the galaxy's most secure facilities, without triggering a single alarm. They had done so while the Academy was on high alert, with military intelligence officers monitoring every corridor. And they had done it casually, as if security measures that protected state secrets were merely inconvenient suggestions. We know. You've been evaluating us, Marcus continued, moving slowly to avoid triggering defensive responses. And we know you figured out that we're not exactly what our classification suggests. Then what are you? Ambassador Talani's translator rendered her question with overtones of barely controlled fear. Marcus exchanged glances with his fellow humans. Some kind of wordless communication passed between them, another unsettling display of coordination. We're survivors, Dr. Kim said simply. Earth isn't like your worlds. It's not stable, predictable, or safe. Everything on our planet is either trying to eat us, poison us, or kill us in some other creative way. So we adapted, added a third human, James Wright, an engineering student whose academic records now seemed far too modest for his apparent capabilities. Evolution doesn't care about your feelings, it only cares about results. The result, Marcus said, is a species that's very good at staying alive under adverse conditions. Chancellor Morden found his voice first. Are you a military force? No. Are you spies? No. Then why are you here? Marcus smiled, and Tisha noticed again how predatory the expression looked on human features. Because we're curious. Because we want to learn. Because we think the galaxy is an amazing place full of amazing people, and we'd like to be part of it. And if we refuse? Fleet Commander Sektar asked quietly. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Tisha watched the humans' faces carefully, looking for any sign of threat or aggression. What she saw instead was something far more unsettling. Disappointment. Then we go home, Dr. Kim said simply. Earth managed without the galactic community for 4 billion years. We can manage for 4 billion more. But, Marcus added, and his tone carried a weight that made several board members shift nervously. That would be a shame. Because like it or not, we're neighbors now. And Earth has learned some hard lessons about what happens when neighbors don't get along. Is that a threat? Ambassador Talani's translator struggled with the nuances. It's history, James Wright replied. On Earth, when different groups couldn't find ways to coexist peacefully, the results were educational. Professor Vexhan, activated his holographic display again, this time showing Earth's historical databases, information the humans had apparently provided freely during their Academy applications. 12 major wars in the last century alone, he read. Weapons capable of sterilizing entire continents. Multiple instances of near-species extinction through conflict. And then, Marcus said quietly, we learned to do better. How? Tisha found herself asking. By realizing that cooperation worked better than competition, that shared knowledge made everyone stronger, that diversity was a strength, not a weakness. Marcus looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives. Sound familiar? The ethereal speaker's bioluminescent patches brightened slightly. You're describing the foundational principles of the Galactic Council. Are we? Dr. Kim asked. Because from where we sit, it looks like you're considering whether to classify us as a threat based on capabilities rather than intentions. Fleet Commander Sektar's mandibles clicked in what Tisha recognized as deep thought. Your capabilities are concerning. They should be, Marcus agreed. Earth is a dangerous place. We wouldn't have survived if we weren't dangerous too, but here's what your threat assessments are missing. He gestured to his fellow humans. We came here alone, 12 people from a species of 8 billion. We came unarmed with no backup, no support structure, no escape plan. We submitted to your evaluations, your monitoring, your classification systems. Why? Chancellor Morden demanded. Because we want to prove that dangerous and hostile aren't the same thing. The statement sent a ripple of consideration through the assembled representatives. Tisha found herself reassessing everything she thought she knew about human behavior. On Earth, Dr. Kim continued, we have a concept called deterrence. The idea that being capable of great violence can actually prevent violence if others know you have no desire to use those capabilities unnecessarily. But how do we know your intentions won't change? Ambassador Tilani asked. You don't, Marcus replied honestly. Just like we don't know that your species won't decide we're too dangerous to live. That's what trust is, accepting uncertainty because the alternative is worse. James Wright stepped forward slightly. Look, we get it. First contact situations are complicated. But consider this. If we were planning some kind of conquest or infiltration, would we really send 12 graduate students to an academic institution? You might, Fleet Commander Sektar said, if you wanted to study our weaknesses. Commander, Marcus said quietly, with respect, if we wanted to study your weaknesses, we wouldn't need to infiltrate your schools. We'd just need to look at your classification systems. The statement hit the chamber like a physical blow. Several representatives exchanged alarmed glances. Explain, the ethereal speaker demanded. Your threat assessment protocols assume that technological advancement equals military capability, Dr. Kim explained. That species development follows predictable patterns. That intelligence and aggression are inversely correlated. Those assumptions have served us well for 10,000 years, Chancellor Morden protested. Against species that evolved on stable worlds with predictable environments, Marcus replied. But what happens when you encounter a species that evolved under different pressures? He gestured toward the holographic display still showing Earth's environmental data. Our world has an extinction event every few million years. Ice ages, asteroid impacts, supervolcanic eruptions, pandemic diseases. Species that couldn't adapt to rapid change didn't survive. So you adapted to chaos, Tisha said, understanding beginning to dawn. We adapted to change, which means we're very good at finding new solutions to new problems. Very good at surviving in environments that weren't designed for us. Very good at... He paused, searching for the right words. Thinking outside established parameters. Professor Vexhan's patterns flickered rapidly as he processed the implications. You're saying that your species represents a completely different evolutionary pathway, one not accounted for in our classification systems. I'm saying that maybe it's time to update those systems, Marcus replied. Because if you found one Death World species, there are probably others out there, and some of them might not be as interested in cooperation as we are. The silence that followed was profound. Tisha could hear the subtle hum of life support systems, the distant murmur of academy operations continuing outside the chamber, normal sounds of a normal academic facility, now overshadowed by the realization that the galaxy might be far more dangerous and far more interesting than anyone had imagined. "What do you propose?" Fleet Commander Sektar asked finally. "Reclassify us appropriately," Dr. Kim said. "Acknowledge that humans are a Class 1 military capability with Class 7 territorial ambitions. We're dangerous, but not expansionist. Capable, but not aggressive. And in return," Marcus smiled, and this time Tisha noticed that the expression seemed genuinely warm rather than predatory. "In return, we share what we've learned about survival, about adaptation, about finding solutions when conventional approaches fail. And, if other Death World species emerge, then you'll have allies who understand what you're dealing with." Ambassador Telani's translator worked overtime to render her next comment. "Proposal contains significant risk, benefit, uncertainty." "Most worthwhile things do," James Wright observed. "But consider the alternative. You can classify us as a threat and spend resources monitoring 12 graduate students, or you can classify us as allies and gain access to 4 billion years of evolutionary problem-solving experience." Fleet Commander Sektar stood slowly, his expression thoughtful. "This decision is beyond the scope of this board. It will require full Galactic Council consideration." "We understand," Marcus replied. "Take all the time you need. We'll be here, studying and learning and trying to convince you that the galaxy is better with us in it than without us. And if the Council decides against inclusion, then we go home, like we said. But we'll remember that when the galaxy needed friends, some people chose fear instead of trust. The statement wasn't a threat. Tisha was certain of that now. It was simply a fact, delivered with the matter-of-fact certainty that characterized all human communication. As the board members began filing out, Tisha lingered behind. She had questions that went beyond military intelligence and threat assessment. "Marcus," she called out as the humans prepared to leave. He turned back toward her, and she was struck again by how different his species was from everything she'd been taught to expect. "When you faced the Shadowhound, were you really just establishing dominance?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I was doing what needed to be done to protect people I cared about, people you barely knew. Does that matter?" Tisha realized it didn't. Not to him, and increasingly not to her either. "The galaxy is going to have a hard time adjusting to your species," she said. "Probably. But we're patient. We've had a lot of practice waiting for people to catch up." As the humans left the chamber, Tisha remained behind, staring at the holographic display still showing Earth's chaotic environmental history. A world of constant change, constant danger, constant adaptation. World that had produced people who could face down apex predators without flinching, who could solve impossible problems through sheer determination, and who could offer friendship even when faced with fear and suspicion. For the first time since the Shadowhound incident, Tisha smiled. The galaxy was about to become a much more interesting place. Epilogue: New classifications, and 6 months later. The new Galactic Council classifications went into effect with minimal fanfare, buried in a routine administrative update that most species never bothered to read. Humanity was quietly reclassified as Class 1 Capability, Restricted Expansion, ATOE, designation that had never been used before and came with a footnote that simply read, "See attached Death World Protocols." Tisha, now graduated and serving as a cultural liaison officer, found Marcus in the Academy's observation deck, looking out at the stars through the massive, transparent aluminum viewport. The facility had been expanded since her graduation, with new wings dedicated to environmental adaptation studies, a fancy name for learning how to survive on worlds that actively tried to kill you. "How does it feel to be officially dangerous?" she asked, settling into the seat beside him. Marcus chuckled. About the same as it felt before, honestly. Though I notice fewer people seem surprised when I do things now. The Academy's applications for human instructors have increased by 400%, Tisha mentioned casually. I heard. Sarah's leading a seminar on creative problem solving under pressure next semester. James is developing a new engineering curriculum based on making do with whatever materials are available. And you? I'm still just taking classes. Turns out there's a lot to learn about the galaxy. Tisha nodded, watching the stars beyond the viewport. Ships moved between them with increasing frequency now. Trade vessels, exploration craft, and the occasional military patrol maintaining the peace that the Galactic Council had preserved for millennia. Have you heard about the Kepler incident? She asked. Marcus's expression grew more serious. The mining colony that went dark? Rescue teams found evidence of predator attacks. Something new. Something that conventional weapons couldn't handle. Tisha paused. The Council's sending a human advisory team. Makes sense. If it's something that evolved on a hostile world, we might have insights others lack. Are you worried? About humans being seen as the galaxy's problem solvers for dangerous situations? Marcus considered the question carefully. A habit Tisha had learned to appreciate about his species. They thought before they spoke, especially about important things. I'm more worried about the dangerous situations than about how we're perceived handling them, he said finally. The galaxy's a big place, Tisha. Full of worlds we haven't explored yet, species we haven't met yet, challenges we haven't encountered yet. And if humanity can help people survive those challenges, then that's what we should do, even if it means being seen as the dangerous species that's useful to have around. Through the viewport, another ship was approaching the Academy's docking facilities. Tisha recognized the design, a deep space exploration vessel, probably returning from survey missions in the Outer Rim. Do you ever miss Earth? She asked. Every day, but I don't miss feeling like the only dangerous thing in my environment. Marcus smiled. It's nice being somewhere that appreciates dangerous skills without fearing the people who have them. Most of the time, he agreed. The rest of the time, we just have to prove ourselves again. Tisha understood. In the months since the reclassification, humanity had begun to find its place in the galactic community. Not as the primitive species everyone had expected, but as the dangerous allies no one had known they needed. Tisha, Marcus said quietly, can I ask you something? Of course, War. That first day with the Shadowhound. Were you really reaching for your weapon, or were you calculating whether you could take it in a fight? Tisha was quiet for a long moment, remembering the terror of that day and how it had felt to watch someone casually dominate a creature that could have killed her entire class. Both, she admitted. But after watching you, I was calculating how to fight it more effectively. Marcus nodded approvingly. Good. Maybe Earth isn't the only world that produces survivors. Maybe not. But you're still the best at it. So far. The simple phrase carried implications that Tisha was still learning to appreciate. Humans didn't assume they were the strongest, fastest, or smartest species in the galaxy. They just assumed they were the most adaptable, and that when new challenges emerged, they would find ways to overcome them. It was a useful trait to have as allies. And as Tisha watched the stars beyond the viewport, she found herself hoping that the galaxy would never have to discover what humans were like as enemies. But she suspected that somewhere in the vast darkness between the stars, something would eventually test that boundary. When it did, she was glad humanity would be on their side and